The agenda this week asked for directions to better transportation planning in the GTHA. We debated a resurgence in prioritizing national self-interest in the international sphere and revisited the debate about Quebec's place in Canada. The agenda's week in review begins with wearable technology and humanity's cyborg future.
We are already merging with technology. We have been, for the longest time. Remember, paper was once a new technology.
Okay, but hang on. I'm pushing back here a little bit. And with somebody who shares the same last name as the captain of the Enterprise who got turned into Locutus of Borg, I am going to ask you about implantable technology being more than just carrying your smartphone in your jacket pocket. I mean, again, are we getting onto a very dangerous, slippery slope when we start talking about this kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, to get technology implanted, unless you do self-surgery, you have to convince a surgeon that there's some benefit that outweighs the risk. For example, there are brain implants people use with epilepsy, and they get them only after very careful consideration that the opportunity is that it would squelch a seizure with greater success than the person is having without it, using medication and other methods. So I don't think we're going to see willy-nilly people cutting themselves open and stuffing technology in until there is a very clear benefit that outweighs the significant risk of an invasive surgery.
Isabel, I got to follow up with you on this because I can imagine the conspiracy theorists among us saying this is just another, I can hear Alex Jones saying it already. This is just another way for the government to control your mind and, implantable technology. Calm my fears. Go.
Well, I agree with Rosalind, who said that this process has already started, and Amanda said it as well, right? So we're on this, what I call the continuum of embodiment, and it's definitely something that we have to challenge, right? So we're moving from smartphones to wearables to ingestible technology.
Ingestible?
Yes, you swallow a computer, it goes through your body.
What?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it provides, it's a camera, right? So it takes pictures of the insides of your digestive tract and can relay that information to a doctor, right, to help patients. So after ingestible is skin-based technology and the notion of brain implants. So I think that one way that you don't have to be afraid is that it's happening slowly, right? It's a continuum. But I think what we do have to do is challenge it at every stage and ask, well, why do we need it? Who will own it? How do we moderate people, commercial entities making money without explaining, well, what it's going to be used for? But one thing I think we have to notice is that large companies are working on this, right? Intel announced that in 2009, that it wanted chips in its customers' heads. And Elon Musk has started Neuralink, which is a startup that combines AI and the idea of brain implants. So,
Mark Zuckerberg's talked about telepathy already.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Tom, I need you in here at this moment, and I get why putting implantable technology in the brain to avoid having seizures if you're an epileptic. I get that. That's a great idea.
Right.
It's the next stages down the road, and I'm hearing from Isabel as well that we've got to start asking tough questions every step of the way. You on side with that too?
Outside of a medical scenario, you have to kind of see how we've done this before, and I think that will ease your concerns. And I think taking a look at the eyewear journey is a really great place to start. LASIK surgery, way back when we first started the monocle, if you would have gone back and told somebody with a monocle we were going to be slicing and dicing our eyes instead of using a monocle, they would be freaking out like how we are right now on the agenda. So you got to see that we're a little bit at the monocle stage with our wearable technology, especially with augmented reality devices, where we're now using our smartphone and looking through our smartphone. We're literally taking our smartphone and putting it to our eyes. That's the monocle. And so we move from the monocle to the glasses to the contact lenses, and the contact lenses to LASIK surgery. Why? Out of convenience. Because it was more convenient to us, and the value was very clear because we couldn't see. So that is how that journey is going to unfold with wearable technology to implants. And as Isabel really clearly pointed out, it's going to be slow and gradual. Right now, it seems like a shock, and it's not good to overly talk about implants, in my opinion, right now, where we're just starting to get comfortable with putting, wristband on our wrist. But this is the direction that we're headed. And you're going to wake up one day and you're going to be wearing your, connected clothing and your smart glasses, and you're going to say to yourself, oh, I know I'm going to go get the, the LASIK smart surgery because I just can't handle wearing contact lenses and glasses all the time.
Maddie, I want to raise with you this notion that we're catching up now, but that many years ago we had experienced what they called the golden age of Toronto transportation infrastructure. I guess it's researcher Stephen Wickens who said this place once upon a time was really a marvel for the rest of the world. Was that in fact the case?
I think it's in some ways a dangerous myth. We built a lot of transit, and the best part of our system was the way that we integrated different modes of transportation together at the station areas. So you can take a streetcar or a bus directly into the TTC station, into the subway, and then get on the subway and go from there. So the way that the system was integrated is second to none worldwide. But I think where the challenges lie is that there's this myth that this was really always evidence-based, but yet we often didn't include the public in decision-making, and so we had adverse impacts in terms of the type of infrastructure we built. Sometimes building too much, sometimes damaging communities in which infrastructure went through. So I think it's important to understand that there was a period between the 1950s and 1980s where we built a lot, but we didn't necessarily tick all the top priorities, and now we're playing catch-up trying to fill the backlog. Well, we have a graphic amplifying on what you just said, Maddie. Here we go, Sheldon, top of page 3. From 1950 to 1980, the population of the GTA grew by about 2 million people, and 400 kilometers worth of commuter rail track was built to service that population. You look at the next 3 decades, however, from 1980 to 2010, the population doubled to 6 million, and we laid 43 kilometers of track over that period of time. Cherise, why so little over that 3-decade period?
Wow, how do I get started? I mean, we haven't caught up, and I think a lot of that comes down to governance. It comes down to politics. It comes down to the fact that we haven't had the right governance structure in place or the authority for Metrolinx to build what we're actually planning. We just keep drawing more lines on map. For example, I went to, I've got a binder that's this thick from Metrolinx, which describes the business case methodology for evidence-based planning. It's great, it's fantastic. I spent two hours learning about it. What's the point if you're going to have a politician come along and say, I don't care about that evidence. The only evidence I care about is how I'm going to get voted by building this piece of infrastructure over here. So we need to think about how we're making decisions. I'm not an expert on governance models, but I do know that we need to create some sort of authority, perhaps, for Metrolinx through the Metrolinx Act to ensure that the decisions that we are making that are evidence-based actually get put in place.
Well, since you've gone here, and we touched on this, Phil, in our conversation earlier, let's keep going here. And you get to sit tight for a second and listen to what everybody else has got to say. Okay, this is obviously a... Look, it's a push-me-pull-you type of thing here, right? I mean, the politicians are the deciders. Sure. The politicians flow the money, but the politicians are not the experts. These guys are the experts. They put forward the information, and the politicians, as we've seen over the last many years, often disregard that information. What do we do about this?
Yeah, well, one thing we can do, there's 2 things we can do. Certainly, we can work on the decision-making process so we can see it, so it's open and transparent. And I know Maddie could talk for hours about exactly how to do that. But there's something more, Steve. There are transit agencies and cities and regional planning organizations that have the power to tax globally. And this is an incredibly important point. Transport for London, all of the revenues that come from the transport system come back to Transport for London.
This is London, UK?
London, UK. They make the decisions about how to invest that money. And they don't make a decision between a competing transit project. They can decide between a transit project, a freeway project, a cycling project, or an arterial project. This gives them the real domain to make important changes in the region.
So that's a governance issue in effect.
It's a governance structure, but it's a financing structure.
When we can speak French in Vancouver or in Toronto, when we hear French, when we see the numbers of youngsters going in immersion class, that means something. That means that Canada want to open a door to French, not to shut it down. Do
Quebecers care about that?
Well, they've got to learn about it. That's part of the difficulties. Being on a show to talk about that, it's very difficult. This is not the topic in Quebec. We've got to push the door for that.
I have often been told, Minister, that Quebecers care a lot about the status of French inside Quebec, but in the rest of Canada, they don't give a damn.
I'll give you the real picture. French for Quebec, French in the world. Not sure there's French in the rest of the country. That is the way people see it. So we've got to make them discover that there's French, and not just there's French outside of Quebec, but there's a new kind of legitimacy given to French by the rest of Canadians.
There is no political will of any kind in the political class of English Canada to integrate Quebec into Canada. And I think it fuels the feeling that still today, a lot of Quebecers, that they are not really being part of Canada in a full way as other provinces are. And as a spokesperson of an independentist party, I think it's one more reason, one more proof to say that Quebec should take his own path and control his own destiny.
Supriya, do you think it's the case, as Gabrielle says, that the rest of Canada basically turned a blind eye to this document or showed a lack of interest? Or is it perhaps English Canada's afraid to go down this road again, because we remember going down this road 21 years ago and it almost resulted in the end of the country?
Yeah, I think the latter is likely true. And I think when we're talking about not just Quebec's needs, but then if you're talking about opening up the Constitution, then every province is going to have a list of grievances. And for sure, Alberta is going to have their list of grievances. And then generally the issue of the federal administration of equalization payments is going to come up. We already know that Jason Kenney out west has made this a bit of an issue in recent weeks. I think it's just something politically for any federal leader to want to avoid. And in terms of whether or not signing a document makes you part of a country, arguably the Harper administration did recognize that Quebec is in fact a distinct society. And further to that, legally, it makes no difference whether or not Quebec has signed on to the Constitution or not. It's definitely a feel-good exercise, but in terms of the actual legal pithiness of it, it really doesn't matter.
We should, I think that's worth clarifying. When Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister, the Parliament of Canada passed a resolution saying Quebecers constitute within Canada a distinct society, right? Or a distinct nation.
A distinct nation, I believe, was the wording.
Yeah. So again, Patrice, legally speaking, this doesn't matter because Quebec is covered, even though their signature is not on the Constitution. But do you think there is something missing or empty in Quebec because that signature technically isn't there?
Honestly, I don't think so. And I mean, I'm not a separatist, so naturally I'm going to come at it with a very different perspective. And as a Franco-Ontarian now for 46 years, certainly a different perspective. What matters here is the dialogue. And the reality is that Quebec has been part of Canada for 150 years. There is a daily reaffirmation of the legitimacy of Canada in Quebec. The country works. And with every day that passes, Quebecers are reminded of that the country works. They support the federal government. They vote in national elections. They treasure the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The document itself actually cites a poll that says that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is more popular in Quebec than the rest of Canada.
And yet the Quebec government overturns charter decisions all the time.
It does, but it's still, that's part of federalism.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of federalism.
As they're allowed to.
They're allowed to. There's the beauty of federalism where we have two orders of government that constantly challenge each other. But what the reality is that after 150 years, the state of Canada is legitimate in Quebec. Now that could change. And anybody, I think, would be naive to think that this is going to last forever. I mean, this is an ongoing discussion that has to happen. This is why this is important. This is why it's important for you and for us to talk about it.
Just to come back for a moment to the question that you asked about the connections between Brexit and what's going on in Hungary and
Poland, Catalonia, Scotland, maybe.
I think it's really, they are connected in this sense, Steve, that these are populist backlashes. And from everything we know, there are two factors that are feeding into this, and the relationship between these two is not always clear. One is losers from this period of hyperglobalization. That's a big part of it. And the second is societies that have difficulty with waves of immigration. And
so that explains the rise in the AFD
absolutely
vote in Germany.
I mean, the million refugees, there's no question that's what pushed the support for the AFD up. But that's not the same as Germany first or America first. And that's a really interesting distinction. This is anger. This is, we don't like this. This is not fair. But it's not an answer to what's in Germany's national interest or what's in America's national interest.
Okay, but Janice, does it go beyond that to a point where we clearly, for much of the world right now, we are no longer interested in being our brother's keeper, right?
There's no question that there is a drop, a reduction in the sense that people have an obligation that extends beyond their borders and that those obligations are limitless.
Do you regret that?
Yes, but it's where the politics of globalization have taken us. And I think everybody needs to learn from that. So a doctrine like responsibility to protect no longer, frankly, and this is not a happy story for Canada, no longer reflects where this country is, much less where the world is. You know, our government came to power committed to peacekeeping, but has not gone forward with it. That is not an accident. There was a very careful look at what's in our interest, what are our risks, in a way that would have been, frankly, inconceivable even 15 years ago.
Randall, you wanted in.
Well, to respond to Roland, most realists that I know would have said NATO is obsolete. I mean, one of the first things that Kenneth Waltz, the father of modern-day realism, said after the Cold War is NATO's days may not be numbered, but its years are. Whether you look at Barry Posen, who wrote Restraint, or John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt, who are calling for America for retrenchment, most realists think, for example, NATO is obsolete, America should end that. And this is a very old principle in realism, that the worst enemy of an alliance is success. So when you defeat the enemy, the alliance crumbles. So victory is a bad thing for an alliance. And yet, what have we seen? We saw NATO expand to Russia's doorstep. And almost every realist said that this would be a disaster, that it would bring to power an authoritarian, revanchist leader like Putin, and that we would have another Cold War. And that's exactly what we've had. And so this idea that, oh, well, cooperation in NATO is the pillar of this international order that America created and all this, well, maybe that's the way, that's the establishment view of foreign policy. And Trump comes in saying NATO's obsolete, and they all say he's crazy, he's crazy. That's not, how can anyone say such a wicked thing? Well, that's, Americans don't see it like the foreign policy types see it.
Go ahead, Roland.
That's not true, Randall. Yeah. Well, I would encourage you and the viewers of this show to go look up the Chicago Council of International Affairs to see the poll that they conducted recently by Roper, in which they asked the American public a whole bunch of questions relating to international affairs. And when it came to whether Americans support maintaining America's commitment to NATO, it was 70%. And when you break that down by party affiliation, it's still more than 50%. And if you look at core Trump voters, it's still over 50%, just over 50%. And
Roland,
there are other interesting measures here to look at. I know you've cited the Pew surveys before. All of those surveys actually do not show a decline in internationalism on the part of the American public. They show a spike in a kind of nativist protectionism in portions of the American public.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, October 20th, 2017. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety. They're all on our website at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.